Welcome to The Beautiful Side of Grief, your go-to podcast if you're wanting to hear from people who have moved through heart-wrenching loss or those who are at the coalface supporting the process. It's diverse, heartwarming, though most of all it is positive and filled with go-tos that you can use yourself. I'm your host, Helen Morris, and I'm a health professional turned energy healing practitioner after I lost my only child and daughter, Tal, in a car accident in 2017. I want to use my own unique experience with loss to help you navigate your journey. You will hear from grief coaches, mediums, authors, first-hand loss accounts, plus many, many more. I'll put the links to any free resources in the episode notes. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can keep informed of each weekly episode. So now grab a pen and paper if you want to jot things down. Sit back and relax as we navigate the beautiful sides of grief. In this episode, we're talking to Jennifer O'Brien, who has helped thousands live and love more fully by recognizing at the end of life comes death, that family caregiving is both the hardest job and the greatest honor most of us will ever face, and grief is abundant love with no place to go. She is the author of The Hospice Doctor's Widow, a journal, a beautiful art-filled journal with beauty, practical insights, humor, and heart. And I'll let her tell you more about that, though Amazon shares the following review. Everyone facing death, their own or a loved one's, benefits from this love story and practical guide in one. For more than 30 years, Jennifer has been a practice management consultant to physicians and served as CEO for 2 large medical practices. She holds a bachelor's degree from Boston University and a master's degree in organization development, and she currently resides in Little Rock, Arkansas. We're going to have a chat about how her own early experiences with loss can help when you actually have to face loss yourself. Plus get advice from Jennifer on why we need to think about our end of life right here and now. And to you, our listeners, I want to thank you. Thank you for joining in. As always, please subscribe if you haven't already. And I'm truly grateful that you're listening in. So welcome, Jennifer. I appreciate and thank you for being here with me today to discuss these important issues. So let's begin with a little of your background and your early experience with loss and how they shaped you, as I know you suffered your first experience of death at quite a young age.
Thank you so much for having me. I think you're doing such important work with this podcast. Yeah, I did have very early experience. I was 18 years old. I had just gone off to college and left home for the first time. And my younger brother, David, who was 13, my only sibling, was in an accident. And he was in a coma for 3 weeks. And then my parents had to make a decision to extubate him and he died. So he died 3 weeks after the accident. And I can't tell you that I handled the first experience with death particularly well. I mean, I didn't do anything crazy or terrible. I was completely bewildered. It was just awfully young to have had that happen. I'll tell you, the first thing that happened is I thought time would stop. I couldn't imagine how time kept going without him in the world. And it doesn't, of course, stop, as you know, and so many we all know at this point. It doesn't stop. It does keep going. And I only bring that up because, you know, there's a lot being talked about in grief these days about how really time doesn't heal. And I see the point in that expression that you made it through. So there is a time factor to the going on. Anyway, 18. And I think it was a particularly unique experience in that for me vis-a-vis my parents, because you know, he was my brother. He was not my child. And I think that I read an amazing book that I didn't find until about 10 years ago by Elizabeth DeVita Rayburn called The Empty Room, Understanding Sibling Loss.
Ah, yes.
That book really saved my life in a lot of ways. I mean, like I said, I only found it 10 years ago, but it really loosened things up for me and helped me understand kind of what I had been going through since the loss of my brother. So, yeah.
Such important points you raised there, because the first thing about time healing, I think there's a perception around healing that everything is going to be okay again and go back to how it was. What I think time does is it just eases you into a different way of living. And it's not so much healing from the point of taking it back, but healing from the point of view in that you're able to get yourself out of bed every morning and carry on. And it may not look pretty for a while, but you know, for me, time certainly has given me a place where I'm comfortable with the loss of my own daughter. And it doesn't mean that I don't think about her every single day, because I
Exactly.
do.
Yes.
And do I miss her? Yes, I do. And does it hurt? Yes, it does. But
and you still want to talk about her and like all that stuff. Time doesn't change that. But yes, you're exactly right. Time, well, first thing it does is prove that the world didn't stop, which is like I said, what I first thought would happen, that there's no possible way this world can go on. And then it does. And so anyway, you're exactly right.
Yeah. And the empty room, I've read quite often about siblings not having a lot of support out there in grief groups or specific places that they can talk about losing a sibling. And I think that's a very important point you raised. So what I will do is
remarkably few opportunities when you consider that there's a lot of us that lose siblings. And her book looks at it really at any age, you know, losing a sibling at any age. She happened to have lost her brother when they were both young, but still losing a sibling is a big deal at any age. It really is. And so, yes, that's a great resource.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that I put the link to that book in the notes. So if anybody's wanting to access it, that's a good book. Okay, so let's move into the story of your husband, Bob, who was himself a caregiver for 40 years in palliative care and hospice before falling ill himself with cancer. So are you able to share with us some of the insights that Bob gave you in the time you spent together, which I believe inspired your 5-star rated book, and plus what it's like to then be in the position of becoming an unsung hero yourself and caring for your loved one who has taken care of so many?
Thank you so much for asking about him and about the journey. So the book was never really intended to be a book. It was a personal art journal. I started keeping it as self-care. When Bob got sick. I am a self-taught collage artist. I took on the idea of learning digital collage at about that time. And so I was taking a lot of the thoughts and feelings that I was having and sort of putting into, you know, I know this is an audio, but you can see the art hanging behind me. That's all from the book. Just putting it into sort of pictorial representation and then writing journal notes on top of those. And I kept going with it. Of course, I had to take a break when caring for him became so intense that I couldn't do it. But I resumed it after he died. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I've been in administrative leadership in healthcare. And so I don't know, it was probably a year or two after he died. I had made it into a little book using a vacation book program, you know, where you put your vacation photos in them and you get a book. Well, I did that with my journal just to see what it felt like to hold it. And I was doing an interim CEO position at a large multi-specialty physician practice. And one of the neurologists I worked with was lamenting that he was in the process of diagnosing 3 patients with ALS. And so I brought in my book and I said, you know, you might want to take a look at this. And he took the book home and he came back the next day and he said, Jennifer, you're not getting your book back. He said, this is super helpful. And I am going to be loaning this book to these 3 patients and their spouses because he, in his words, it sort of closed a gap or helped to close a gap between what the physician can do for the patient and what the family caregiver really needs in terms of help understanding where we're headed and what's going on. And that was another part of why I started the journal, was because Bob, in his work as a palliative care physician, had so many wonderful ways of approaching the topic of end of life with his patients and their families. And now we were looking at that ourselves. We were having to turn all those ways and techniques and thought processes on ourselves. And I wanted to have a record of that. And so, and besides, it's not so easy to process all that. So I did it like just to sort through things. And so that's, and this neurologist then said to me, you know, you're not getting your book back. And Jennifer, you need to figure out how to get this published so that we can make this available to other people in a similar position, serious diagnosis for a family member, and they can get this book and be helped by your story and those perspectives that I had. And so I found a publisher, it's a small press here in Little Rock, Arkansas, and it's mainly run by one woman, and she became a big believer in that same concept that this journal could help a lot of people. And so she said, I want to publish this. And so that's how it all started.
That's beautiful because it's so organic. It happened in such a beautiful way as you were sort of caregiving, and then the aftercare experience where you were grieving, and so it was therapeutic as well as becoming a tool that could help so many on their own journey. And I love that you didn't actually sit down to write or create a book, that it just evolved. So I think those are the best books, actually.
Well, and the thing about it is it's a lot of art and really very short thoughts, and it's only 85 pages. And when you're faced with that kind of big news, right? Someone you love or yourself have been diagnosed with a big diagnosis, whether it's terminal or not, it's, you know, we're all at the end of life comes death. So we're all sort of terminal in some respect. But when you get that big diagnosis, you can't sit down and read a big chapter book about how to do it, right? You need this thing which you just open up and get a couple little thoughts and then close it and come back to it later when you have more space and more mind for what you need to take in.
Yes, that's such an important point because people just cannot think. So you're not reading. It took me probably 18 months before I could even start reading a normal book again. I just used to read snippets, and I used to listen to podcasts.
Yes.
Hence the reason that developed my love of podcasts, and because that was easy for me. But I could not read for such a long time, and I was an avid reader. I would read every single day. So yes, I understand that, and that's such an important point. So fill us in what Bob meant when he spoke about those in his care and their families, when he mentioned precious time.
Yeah, so Bob would when he sat down to have a meeting with a patient and their family, he would tell them, you're into precious time. Precious time is when you say what you need to say and you don't say what you will later regret. And it was in effect a code for, this is going to end. And it was really a beautiful way to put it. People responded to it very well. But, people want to be told that. They truly don't want, a lot of physicians don't feel comfortable basically saying, you're going to die at the end of this, and the truth is, we are going to die at the end of life. And the fact that this person who is helping us navigate the last part, the part where our loved one is ill, is not willing to sit down and say, this is going to end, so that you can take stock of what you need, the love that you need to express and the pettiness that you don't need to get into, right? Like
Yes,
there's no space for that in precious time. And it was such an important concept for me managing my own survivorship, right? To know that this is going to come to an end and I'm going to have to go on and look back on how I behaved during our precious time.
Yeah.
And I need to feel good about that. And so, yeah, the precious time is an important concept that I wish more healthcare providers would engage in talking about, because it really does help. It really does help to put things around it. I'm always so brokenhearted when I hear people who have lost someone, especially when it's illness, and they say, I just didn't realize. I just didn't realize we were running out of time, and they truly did not. And I feel like I've done this a couple of times with friends and extended family, where you're framing it in a way that says, hey, this doesn't go on forever. You don't always, you're not going to necessarily have tomorrow. So, keep that in mind as you proceed.
I think it's a good premise to live life by anyway, because
is.
You never know what's around the corner. For me, it was a motor vehicle accident that happened very suddenly. My daughter was 18 and a half. The one thing that gave me peace was I didn't have any regrets. And I know that it would have been easy with a teenager to have had regrets, but we worked really hard on that. And we worked hard on communication and telling each other in a really kind way and communicating well. And we were quite different personalities. So I think if we actually just practice that on a daily basis, then it makes it easier for when those times come, just to really just give you heartfelt messages.
It does. It absolutely does. It's an important concept that I was raised with, because my father lost his mother after a big argument. And he lived with that forever. And so we were raised that, you resolve things before you hang up the phone or say goodbye or whatever, that it's very clear, even if you don't resolve whatever the matter is at hand, that the love is very clear and spoken before you say goodbye in any phone call, anything. So that was, and I had the same experience with my brother, because I was 18, he was 13. Little spats were pretty common, but I thank God every day that the last thing I said to him was, I love you. And he said the same thing. And that's, because the regret is the part that is so sadly unnecessary. And I think regret can be one of the items that keeps us from the beauty of grief and the fact that it really is love. That is one of the things that kind of gets that sideways instead of focusing there. I think there are a couple of other things that interfere with that. And one is a lack of planning, especially in the case of those of us who are adults, right? Obviously, we're not planning for your 18-and-a-half-year-old daughter to die, but Bob, Bob was a mature adult. I'm a mature adult. I have advanced healthcare directives. Yep. We need to do things so that when the inevitable does happen, when we do die or someone we love dies, things are in order and they're easily found, so that the other thing that doesn't keep us from the good grief is the administrative stuff, right? That's another thing that overwhelms people is they all of a sudden there's all this, where's the deed to the house? How do I make the mortgage payment? All this sort of stuff that rains down. And now we're spending our energy on sorting through administrative life stuff when we could be leaning in and loving and mourning and missing and all that really good stuff. And so that's another big part of what I'm doing in this new life of
Yes, and I think you described that as like there being no do-overs in the end of life and around your loved ones. And so, once you reach that age of being an adult, you really need to be making clear about what it is you want your end of life to look like, because you may not get to 60, 70, 80, 90. You may have out of the blue an accident. And so it's very important for both yourself and your loved ones to know what you think about those things and how you want. Do you want a funeral or not? Because there is the option not to have one. Do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? People have very, very strong opinions on that. And do you want it to be a celebration of your life? And that alters how people actually manage that, and favorite music and things you're into. And or do you want to party before you even pass? And that's what some people are doing now. So unless you're actually having those conversations and writing that down and recording that somewhere, it is very, very difficult for people to navigate once something's happened, and whether that be a serious illness or an accident where you end up in a coma like your brother did, unable to communicate and express your wishes, or, suddenly you're gone. So that goes very nicely in what you were talking about, the advanced care planning and all those beautiful aspects to it. So yeah, is there anything else that, you think you would like to add around that you feel like our listeners need to be aware of?
That it's probably that I'd like everyone to know that it is a lot easier to talk. Everything is a lot easier when it happens if you've had some conversations before things start happening.
Yes.
Bob and I had a joke. Actually, it was a joke about he would say, don't call the EMTs until I'm cold and blue. Well, before he got ill. Yes. And that was such a great, it happened. He said that for the first time very early in our relationship. And it was a really great reference point because I could say, yes. So you still don't want me to call the EMTs till you're, blue and cold? And he would be like, yep, I'm still there. The other thing he would do that was so effective with people, and I think this is a really important concept. He would tell them the story of his parents. Both of his parents lived into their 90s. His father made it very clear that he wanted, just the minute he started to show signs of demise, he wanted simply to be kept comfortable and to die naturally and quickly. Like he didn't want any major interventions of any sort. His mother wanted every conceivable life extending measure available. Yeah. And Bob used to tell this story to his patients and their families, and he's absolutely right in this. Both of those people were right. Yes. Because your answer is the right answer. I am not advocating for doing nothing versus doing everything. That is your choice. I'm advocating for discussing it and documenting it with the people who you love and who can speak for you when that time comes. That's all it is. It is your preference. Just make it clear.
Yes, and it's so important, like you say, to even discuss where all those important documents are. And for me, it was like, ensuring that, I don't know about in the States, but in New Zealand, it's optional whether you have, insurance for motor vehicles or not. You can have third party or whatever. But it's important having your phones insured and vehicles insured and things like that when you have an accident, because otherwise you're up for some quite substantial costs unexpectedly. And for me, gosh, one thing I came across that I'm just going to share because this just came to me as you were speaking was that nobody would take her car because it had been involved in a fatality. And so we had to actually go and get her car blessed and then find somebody who was prepared to take her car.
Interesting.
Now, I never knew about that. Never, ever knew that. And that sort of like, I thought, what do you do? And because you can't think, you have no idea what you need to do. And I know that's sort of digressing a wee bit, but it's those sorts of things that just come out of the blue at you and you just don't know. So tell
I
me.
think it's a really important point, Helen, because there are those things that come out of the blue. Bob and I knew exactly. There's a page in the book where I list every single thing we did to prepare for my survivorship, for his death. Everything we did. Guess what? There were a couple things we didn't do. We knew, right? We knew better than most how to handle all this stuff. And there were a couple things I forgot. I forgot to really, truly document all the passwords, and I forgot to put the utilities in my name. And was it devastating? No, but it cropped up similar to the story you just told about the car. It startled me when I realized I have to go stand in line at the cable office because my husband died. And am I capable of it? Absolutely. Does it hurt like heck? Yeah, it sure does. I mean, to have to stand in that line and then say to somebody, however many different times, we got to put this in my name because my husband died. That
and then you have
stuff.
to have the certificates, and then you have to, and for me, because my daughter had turned 18, she was legally considered an adult. So then I had to prove that she actually wanted me to act on her behalf. And so that in itself was something I had to navigate. But the other thing that a lot of, particularly parents, suddenly realize after they lose a child or a teenager in particular is that their teenagers often have their phones locked or passcode protected. And suddenly the photos on those phones become very, very important, those memories, those photos.
Oh my gosh,
and
that's exactly right.
Yes. I see all the time people saying, my daughter's phone's locked. How do I get in to get the photos or this or that, And we had to do that with my own daughter, how to access her phone for the photos because there was just her and I, and we didn't have very many photos together. And I really wanted her photos.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I've been working right now on some documents, and hopefully I'm going to have something together, what I'm calling the Good Grief Kit, which is basically how do you prepare for end of life at any time so that those you leave behind, right, will only have the good grief. And one of the items in there, and it's not just for death, it's for any sort of emergency, is that in your phone is a medical ID section that first responders and medical professionals can get into in case of emergency, but they can't get into the rest of your phone.
Yes.
They can just get into the part that says who your emergency contact is and what your blood type is and all that sort of stuff. But
great idea.
Point about the phone access for the pictures alone is incredibly important.
Yes.
That's a big one.
They become monumental. They are so, so important. So I think that's something we need to think about. And it's not necessarily giving a passcode to your parents. Maybe it's a best friend or somebody like that has access to your phone, or somebody that you know, or I don't know, just, another way that somebody can access it in those extreme circumstances. I know that we have an organization here in New Zealand that you can actually go into and put it, or you have a nominated person that can access it or two people if you pass, and then they have access to all your documents and all your information. So the same thing you're talking about
here, and I have just finished in the practice what you preach realm. I have just finished putting all of mine into and giving my best friend from college access to all of it into one of those. Fantastic. We have a number of different ones here. They're all private, companies that do it.
Yeah. So I just want to go back a wee bit and talk about advanced care plans, because how can people find these and access these?
Oh, well, the probably the best thing to do is, well, there's a couple of organizations that support conversations about this. One is called the Conversation Project. Another one is called The Cake. But the other thing you can do, I think quite simply, is to Google advanced care plan and your state or province or country, et cetera, so that because they are, at least in the States, they're different from state to state, the forms and
Yes.
so forth. That's what I would probably do. That would probably be the most direct thing. And they do have different names. Like, so advanced care planning is sort of considered something that you do sometimes when you're already ill. Advanced directive is something where you say ahead of time, listen, I don't ever want a feeding tube. I don't ever want dialysis, all that sort of stuff. So play with the language. Living will is another term that we have. Healthcare decisions in the States. And I know in Canada, April 16th is a day that sort of, in the States, we call it National Healthcare Decision Day. In Canada, I think they call it Advanced Directive Day or something like that.
Yes.
But anyway, and I'm sure y'all have it, right?
Yeah, well, we have a website that we can go to in our Ministry of Health. So that
Okay.
covers the entire country, and it's a free booklet that you can download and complete. And yeah, you can just give a copy to your GP practice if that's relevant or not, or if that's what you want to do or not. So yes, but it's still something that's not often widely discussed, and I know
No.
that they're trying to get more and more people aware, and I like that Canada has a day celebrating that, or not celebrating that, sorry, that was a wrong word, but
I don't know. I
actually
think it's a good
focused
word.
on that.
I think it's important to celebrate. I
Oh,
mean,
good.
this is part of normalizing something that's perfectly normal,
Yes,
right?
yes. Yes, and I think that we had a discussion just before we went live about that, about normalizing death. And so just share with us some of your wisdom around that.
Well, my wisdom around normalizing death. Let's see. Well, so when we launched the book, my book, we had a party. It was right before the whole world shut down for COVID-19. So it's kind of the last hurrah, if you will. And we drank obituary cocktails and we ate funeral food. And I had on the screen, I had a number of quotes and things kind of rolling about, reality, end of life comes death, no do-overs and end of life, and your loved ones go on, changed forever. And so we played with that. We had a lot of fun with that. And we had a photo booth with, a living will prop and angel wings and all that sort of stuff. That was fun. Yep. And then there's a game out now called the Death Deck, which is, I know, right? It's a 112 card game where you can do it as a game or you can do it as a conversation prompt. And it just has a lot of really great questions to promote fun conversation about what your end of life wishes are. And some of them have some humor to them. They're multiple choice and they have some humor. And some of them are open-ended, perhaps a little bit more serious. And then I was just right before I got on this interview, I was listening to a new album out by a British group called, I think they're called The Tongue, which is spelled Tunng. They're folktronica or something like that type music. They have a new album out called The Death Club, which is awesome. It is such beautiful music, and all the songs basically go into the topic of death, and they did a podcast on it. It's really neat. So I think there's a lot of things. There's a whole, if you follow hashtag death positive movement on Instagram or one of the social media or death positivity, you will find that there's a whole generation of people a bit younger than me, actually, who are much more willing to talk about this openly. And I just think we need to bring that up the generation ladder a little bit so that those of us who are actually closer probably to death will, feel more comfortable talking about it.
And that's what actually prompted me to do this podcast and actually call it The Beautiful Side of Grief. Because, people look at me like askance sometimes, like they go, grief, beauty, come on. And I go, no, actually, in my experience, I've had so many positives around this, and probably it has helped me grow into a person that I never thought I was capable of growing into. And to do this now with people all over the world, honestly, it just warms my heart, because I feel that we need to know the flip side, because there is not enough conversation around this. There's plenty around grief and the dark times around that, but we need to flip that over and also show the positive sides of it as well.
Well, and it's also, there's a online magazine called Better After 50, which is ba50.com. And they published an essay of mine recently that's called The Intimacy of Sex, Marriage, and Death Preparation. And the truth is that there are few things more intimate than being the person that that someone talks to about their end of life wishes. And then, in fact, being the person that carries those out, right? I mean, you just don't get more intimate than that. And intimacy is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And knowing, like you did when your daughter died, you knew that she was still with you. You knew, right? Yes. You talked about that in the intro podcast. And that is intimacy. That's what that is. And there is just great beauty to that. But you got to be willing to lean in but it's beautiful. There's no question about it. It's nice that we now, when my brother died in 1983, you really weren't, at least again, I only know the United States at this point in my life, but death, grief was not discussed. And to some degree, it's still the case that you don't talk about your loved ones who have died because it makes people feel uncomfortable. And the truth is, there's nothing I want to do more than talk about my brother and my mother and my husband, right? I still love them. So
the love doesn't go.
About them, then all of a sudden this is putting me in some sort of weird shame category or taboo category. And that's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. It's love.
I just refused to not do that, because, my daughter was my life. She was my absolute life. And so, of course, I was going to talk about her. Just because she suddenly wasn't here one day didn't mean to say that she hadn't had an impact on my life and my feelings and different events and things like that. And still does. And I felt that it actually made it easier for others to speak about her, especially her friends, 18-year-olds who had to suddenly navigate the loss of their friend. And knowing that they could talk to me about it and I wasn't going to end up in a crumpled heap on the floor was so, so important. And they told me some stories. Honestly, they were just so precious. They were a bit naughty. I mean, she had that naughty side to her. And like, she'd just give you this big, beautiful smile, and that would mask a few things that she got up to, but fun. And I knew she wasn't an angel there, but it was so nice just to have these kids relax and share those stories and those memories, and it helped them process it too. And know that at any time they could just reach out and going, today sucks. I'm thinking about her and today sucks. And that's okay. And I get that. And
that's another really good point, is that not everyone, that I always say that the word should has no place in compassion. That I remember shortly after my brother died, that my father got angry with me because I came home too late one night, and I'd been out with my friends who also were his friends. And he really judged me harshly that I should have been home with my mother, and I should have done this and I should have done that. And it was, it's a horrible feeling. So as open as you and I are to talking about the people we've loved and lost, I also respect that some people are not okay talking about it, or they're not okay talking at certain points. And that it's always good to kind of feel somebody out and say, are you up for telling me a good story about so-and-so today? And they can say, I'm not. Or they can say, yes, I would love to tell you about when he did this or when she did this,
Such a beautiful point to make, because and this whole process is about respecting where everybody is at. There is never a point where, using that word again, where you should be telling somebody what they should be feeling or how they should be acting or how they should be moving forward. And that, I think the purpose of what we're doing here today is just to, talk about a different way of looking at it. And that's what my podcast is all about. Never what people should do, but always introducing different ways that you can look at this. And if that's right for you, fantastic. If it's not, that is equally okay.
Exactly.
So that just about finishes us up for this episode, Jennifer. And I really appreciate the real conversation that we've had together about death and us needing to have those difficult conversations and to prepare for it, so we're not faced with that difficulty down the line. But I'd like to finish off with asking you, what is the best thing that has happened in your day so far, or your week this week?
Well, this interview is pretty high up on the list. It's been a real pleasure. Yes. I've really enjoyed talking with you. So I would say,
even though there were a few technical glitches right at the beginning.
Bygones. Those we're already done with that.
Those.
Are you kidding? We've more than made up for it with good conversation.
Absolutely. And what is your go-to? What I always love hearing what people's go-tos are when they're having a really bad day, when things just turn to custard.
Custard. That just makes me hungry. So that's interesting that I say that, because the first thing I do, this was advice that Bob used to remind me. The first thing I do is check, am I overly tired or overly hungry? He was such a big one for that. Like, and so often, if I can, one of those is the issue that, I got a terrible night's sleep. So it's just a matter of lowering my expectations for myself and the day. And the other thing, I guess, good advice that I probably need to be better about following myself is asking for help. I'm not great at asking for help, but reaching out when you really do, especially now during isolation, when you need to hear a friendly voice, and being okay with reaching out and saying, okay, I need to hear a friendly voice, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Those are great points. And we're going to finish off with your 3 takeaways that you'd like to share.
My 3 takeaways pretty much always are: at the end of life comes death. There are no do-overs in end of life. You've got one chance to get it right. And that changed forever. The survivors remain. And so let's be deliberate about, how we interact and behave with each other.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. An absolute pleasure having you as my guest today, Jennifer. And yes, I look forward to actually getting your book and reading it. It's a bit of a delay getting it sent out to New Zealand, so I'm just going to have to wait in anticipation for that. But definitely, I will put all the links, what we've discussed and shared today in this episode, in the episode notes, so that people know where they can go to get your book, which is called The
Hospice Doctor's Widow, a Journal.
Okay. And where can they purchase that from?
Probably the most direct way is Amazon. There's also barnesandnoble.com carries it. You are welcome to go to your local bookstore and ask for it, but I'm not I'm not entirely sure in New Zealand they'll have it or not.
Well, look, there are a couple of really boutique-y bookshops that get in some absolute treasures. So definitely I will look out for it. Oh, I can't wait to get it because it's got art in it. It's got pearls of wisdom in it. And I just am excited to get that.
Oh, thank you.
Jennifer, an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, I feel exactly the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode today, feel free to share it with others. Hit the subscribe button so you can be notified of each weekly episode. Also, rate and review, especially if there is more you want to know that perhaps we didn't have time to touch on today. And if you are after resources to help you out on this journey, head to healingtobeYou.com and check those out there. So until next time, be kind to you and thank you for joining us on the beautiful side of grief.